My name is Mark Nordenberg, and as chair of the Pennsylvania Legislative Reapportionment Commission, it is my privilege to call this combined administrative meeting and hearing to order. I am joined at this session by the Democratic leader of the Senate, Senator Jay Costa, to my left, and by the majority leader of the House of Representatives, Leader Carrie Benninghoff, to my right. We expect that the time may come that the Democratic leader of the House, Joanna McClinton, may be joining us remotely. She apparently is spending time with the president, so we'll just have to see how quickly she cuts him off and connects to us. We all want to extend a warm welcome to the citizens of Pennsylvania who are joining us either by live stream or here in the Capitol. As has been our custom, we will be posting both a video and a transcript of this session as soon as they are available, and past practice suggests that the video will be posted sometime tomorrow. There is just one matter to discuss in our administrative meeting, and that is my recommendation regarding the appointment of a mapping consultant. As I have said from the very first meetings I've had with the caucus leaders who serve as the other commissioners, I have considered identifying a mapping specialist to be one of my highest priorities in assembling a team. And I have placed a high value on that resource for a number of reasons. First, we do expect to receive an unprecedented number of citizen-drawn maps this cycle, and we need to be positioned not only to receive but to review them. Second, we know, based on its decisions over the course of the past decade, that the state Supreme Court will be expecting us not only to assess our own submissions, but to compare them to submissions that have come to us from other people. And the presence of a specialist on our team will both enhance the integrity of the process and provide us with an expert in the event that there are challenges made to the plan that we submit. And finally, and this may be most important, I need that kind of help to keep up with the other commissioners and their fine-tuned and experienced teams. There have been some signs of concern about how I intend to relate to the other commissioners. Perhaps a concern that if I'm walking through life with a specialist, I'll begin to wrest control of the process from others. Let me simply say, and I think Senator Costa, who I have known for years, can underscore this, that that isn't my style. I have great respect for the leaders who are serving on the commission. I have great respect for all elected officials, and particularly those who have been chosen by their peers to serve as leaders. Consistent with the approach that I have taken in recruiting for other positions, I looked for a professional with experience and directly relevant expertise who also is nonpartisan. It was my further preference to identify someone from Pennsylvania if that proved to be possible. After talking to others about the range of possibilities, I developed a list of about a dozen plausible candidates. After reviewing their records, I had discussions with four before I began to focus on Jonathan Service, with whom I now have had a number of extended discussions and who I have now recommended to the Commission. Dr. Service was born in Pennsylvania and spent the first 10 years of his life here, living first in Cranberry Township, which at that time was the outer reaches of suburban Pittsburgh, and then in rural Slippery Rock, where his parents built a home. When he was about 10, his father lost his job and the family moved to Las Vegas, where he could find work. Dr. Service stayed in Las Vegas to earn his undergraduate degree from the University of Nevada at Las Vegas, becoming the first person in his family to earn a college degree. After working for several years and taking graduate level courses and also developing his GIS skills, Dr. Service enrolled full-time at the University of California at Irvine, where he earned both a master's degree and a PhD in political science. He currently holds a postdoctoral fellowship at Carnegie Mellon University. Postdocs, as they typically are called, generally are awarded to someone who has recently earned a doctorate and who is viewed as having special promise. The chair of Dr. Service's dissertation committee at Cal Irvine was Professor Bernard Groffman, who is one of this country's leading election law scholars. In addition to his writings and his teaching, Professor Groffman has extensive experience serving as a special master for judges to whom redistricting lawsuits have been assigned. He is known not only for his expertise, but also for his nonpartisan approach, and he has been recommended for assignments as a special master by both Democrats and Republicans. Dr. Service was appointed assistant to the special master in 3 cases in which Professor Groffman served as master, and in that role demonstrated the technological skills that will be important in this assignment. The roles, to be clear, are different in certain fundamental respects. A master is appointed by a judge and basically assigned the responsibility of drawing maps. In this case, of course, the ultimate responsibility for drawing maps and developing plans rests with the 5 members of the commission. And in that sense, I consider a specialist to be a resource to the commission and to me. I described the technological abilities possessed by Dr. Service to the other members of the commission in an earlier submission. For now, let me just say that he is highly skilled. There is a resolution relating to his appointment. Before asking for a motion and second, let me open up the floor to Leader Benninghoff and Leader Costa for any comments or questions they might care to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just say thank you very much for having us here. We're part of the panel. We look forward to learning more about Dr. Service's service, and we appreciate what has been shared with us ahead of time, and we appreciate our audience here in our first formal hearing. Look forward to a very insightful meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, I too want to say thank you for sharing the information about the new appointee, and more importantly, recognizing that we are going to be, through this process, experiencing a significant number of maps that would need to be reviewed in a thoughtful and appropriate way and allow us the opportunity to better perform our duties as commission members. So I thank you for that and recognizing how important that is.
I really appreciate those comments and want to say to those who have gathered for this hearing that they are a clear reflection of the attitudes that have been expressed to me, both by Leader Benninghoff and by Leader Costa, as well as I see Leader McClinton kind of up on the screen now, and Leader Ward, and that is we really want to do this job well. And we're working hard to lay the foundation for that kind of success. As I indicated, there is a resolution that has been distributed to the members of the commission. Let me ask if there is a motion and a second.
I will second the motion to move Resolution 3A and adopt it.
Thank you very much. Is there any further discussion? If not, let me call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The resolution is adopted. With that business behind us, we have the opportunity to move to the hearing portion of today's gathering. The first two presenters will be Brent McClintock, the Executive Director of the Legislative Data Processing Center, who is here with us. Mr. McClintock, would you care to come forward to the table? And he is joined by Jennifer Schultz, who is connecting with us remotely. She is the Data Services Manager for the Penn State Data Center. I think everyone knows that the task of reapportioning the state is difficult in any year. And most of us know that this year will present particular challenges because of the delays in the delivery of federal census data to Pennsylvania and to all of the other states. I quickly learned that data that generally arrives in April now will first arrive in one format in the second half of August, that it will arrive in, quote, final form at the end of September. And even then, there are adjustments to the data that will need to be made. This seems rather fundamental, but it also is rather critical to the process. And so it is my hope and expectation that Mr. McClintock and Ms. Schultz will provide us with some insights into what we can expect in terms of moving forward as expeditiously as possible. Both have submitted written testimony. I think it would be most efficient for us to hear from both of them because they are partnering in this effort, and then open the floor to take questions from the pair. Mr. McClintock.
Thank you. Chairman, members of the Commission, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to participate in today's hearing. My name is Brent McClintock, and I am the Executive Director of the Legislative Data Processing Center. We are a bipartisan service agency that has provided operational and technical support to the General Assembly, and we've done so since 1968. One of my office's responsibilities is to assist the General Assembly with the processes of reapportionment. And what I'd like to do today is just to highlight a few of the activities that we plan to participate in over the next few months as they relate to the commission and its work towards redistricting. In 2014, my office was appointed as the legislative liaison to the Census Department for Pennsylvania in the 2020 Redistricting Data Program. This is a role that LDPC has served in since 1980. And this project is a multi-phase project that allows each state to provide accurate and updated information to the Census Department in preparation for the decennial census. In 2017, we selected the Penn State Data Center to partner with us to provide GIS expertise. Now, the work of preparing for the 2020 census actually began a number of years ago, and it really hit full swing in 2017 with the Phase 2 Voting District Project. This program provides states the opportunity to delineate voting districts and to suggest census block boundaries. After the Census Bureau completes the decennial census, this geography is then paired with the population counts and is returned to the states as the basis for the redistricting process. Our last submission to the census for this project was back in March 31st of 2020. Now, once the census delivers the official PL 94-171 data set, LDP and Penn State will review this data to see if any adjustments or corrections are needed, and will apply those if they are. This adjusted data is then certified by the Commission and used as the basis for reapportionment in what is considered usable format. In 2019, House Bill 1588 directed each county in Pennsylvania to avoid election district changes between the dates of December 31st of 2019 through November 30th of 2022. However, historically, in previous redistricting cycles, election district changes did still occur during this time frame. And so in order to provide the most accurate depiction of the geography in Pennsylvania for the basis of reapportionment, LDP and the Penn State Data Center will work together to update the maps that are provided by the Census Department, and then we'll adjust the population accordingly. During the last redistricting cycle in 2011, LDP reviewed the census data, the official PL release, and it was determined that adjustments were needed in 4 distinct areas. These same adjustments may also be necessary in 2021, and I've highlighted those and detailed those in my written remarks for your review. The census data was expected to be delivered on April 1st of this year, but as you know, in 2020, the Census Department did announce that due to delays caused by COVID-19, the 2020 census data was going to be delayed into July 31st of this year, and that is a date that was later pushed back to September 30th of this year. Now, we understand that these delays pose a significant hardship to the Commission relating to the work of reapportionment, and specifically in regards to the election deadlines that are approaching for the 2022 elections. And so LDP and the Penn State Data Center have worked to identify areas of work that can be completed in advance of the September release of the census data. One avenue that we are considering is what Census is referring to as the legacy data that Census plans to deliver in mid-August. And our plan is to review that as soon as possible to see if that data can be used. Our hope is that it will be able and will provide an avenue to expedite this process. Still, the process of adjusting the data and of validating this information requires time. In 1990, 2000, and in 2010, there were at least 4 months of time that passed between the release of the census data and the date that the Commission certified the data as usable. By identifying work that can be completed in advance, we do hope to shorten this 4-month time frame to approximately 2 months, and our goal is to deliver the Commission with adjusted and validated data by mid-October of this year. So Thank you for your time. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Ask her if she would offer testimony on behalf of the Penn State Data Center before we move to questions.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me well? Yes, thank you. Chairman and members of the Legislative Reapportionment Commission, thank you for the opportunity to join you this afternoon virtually. My name is Jennifer Schultz, and I am the Data Services Manager for the Pennsylvania State Data Center. We are the Commonwealth's official source for population and socioeconomic statistics as part of the State Data Center program, a federal state cooperative program with the U.S. Census Bureau. We were established in 1981 by executive order of the governor, and we are located at Penn State Harrisburg in Middletown within the Institute of State and Regional Affairs. The data center was chosen by the Legislative Data Processing Center to provide geographic information system support during the 2020 Census Redistricting Data Program. We began our work in 2017 for phase 2 of the Redistricting Data Program, the Voting District Project. Phase 2 included 3 parts: the initial identification of updates, a verification of updates, and then a final verification phase. In addition to this work, we will provide GIS support for phase 3 of the Redistricting Data Program, delivery of the Census Redistricting data files, and the geographic data products. During each part of phase 2, we worked with the counties in Pennsylvania, LDPC, and the Department of State to collect and verify voting district boundaries, codes, and names, and submit this data to the Census Bureau. We requested a shapefile of the voting district boundaries from each county by contacting the county's election officials and the county GIS staff. ESRI shapefiles are a geographic data file format that represent boundaries such as voting districts and counties. And this was the requested format by the U.S. Census Bureau to deliver data for this program. So we compared the files received from the county against the U.S. Census Bureau's to identify areas that needed updating. We verified the updates with the Department of State and updated the shapefiles for submission to the Census Bureau. We also compared the names and codes across the files from the U.S. Census Bureau, the county, LDPC, and the Department of State. And we submitted the updated county shapefiles to the Census Bureau, the final submission on March 31st of 2020. Following that final verification, we monitored the delays in census timelines and contacted each of the counties again about anticipated changes so that we could prioritize our work and determine the frequency of contact needed to prepare for receipt of the redistricting data files and the geographic products from the census. The delays in the release have been noted, and we now know that Census will deliver the redistricting data to the states by September 30th, and they will also provide the data in the legacy data file format in mid to late August. So we are now preparing for the data release and working with LDPC to identify work that can be completed in advance. The Census Bureau has released the 2020 Census Geographic Data Products. We received Pennsylvania's products in February of 2021. And the Census Bureau has also provided us a prototype of the legacy summary file. We have begun developing SAS programs to process this legacy file format, which will allow us to process and format the final data more quickly. As Brent noted, there were 4 types of corrections made in 2011. To prepare for these adjustments, we are currently reviewing the geographic data products and contacting counties and the Department of State to identify and verify potential changes. We're developing additional GIS and SAS scripts to pre-process the data and run comparisons between that mid-August and September 30th release. And these scripts will produce the final work product and serve as a quality control safeguard. By working with LDPC to complete this advanced work, we anticipate completing the adjusted data file by mid-October of 2021. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you. Let me ask Leader Benninghoff and Leader Costa if they have questions for either of these witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, to both Mr. McClintock, and Ms. Schultz, I want to thank you both for supplying us testimony ahead of time. That's always very beneficial to be able to brief over that. This is probably directed more to the executive director, and thank you for your work there. Just for my own clarification, you talked about the legacy files and that data that will be forthcoming in August and some additional updates to that in September. I just want to make sure I'm correct or see where you are on this. June 4th, 2021, there was a presentation done at the National Conference of State Legislators, which I believe is still available on YouTube. A gentleman named James Whitehorn, chief of the Census Redistricting Voting Rights Data Office, explained the following I think is important to note. He says, legacy files that will be published in August are the exact same data as that will be used or produced in different formats in September. You do have some additional work to be done to be able to extract the data you want from that, but it's the same data. It won't change between August and September. People can use that in confidence and in August and in for that work that they are needed to do. That to me is comforting, and I'm just curious if you're in agreement with that as we all proceed forward. Are you in agreement with Mr. Whitehorn's comments on that?
I believe that's going to be the case.
Good.
We've heard similar comments from the Director of Census, and they've assured us that the August and September releases will be identical.
That's very helpful, and I appreciate that, and look forward to working with you folks, and thank you for your current work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My recollection was 10 years ago, there was undercounting alleged, and then there was numbers added through this process. What, if that would occur again now, what would that do to your timeline of providing which I believe would be, listening to Jennifer's testimony, usable data by mid-October? Would that modify the timeline at all?
It would depend on the different corrections that were brought up. It could add time if further adjustments are needed.
Do you recall how much time it took last time to get us usable data? I know you have the chart you provided 10 years ago. Looked like it was many months. Is that because of that particular injection of that dispute?
I don't recall the specifics of the exact situation there. I do know that in 2011, I believe the data was released in March, if I remember correctly, possibly April, and then it wasn't certified until August due to the different adjustments that were necessary.
But if I'm hearing the testimony earlier of Ms. Schultz, we can be looking at potentially usable data, assuming no other interference with things, mid-October, but likely to be able to begin to work with that data mid-August.
Correct. Census will release that data in mid-August. We then will go through a process of receiving it and processing it and putting it in a format that the commission has typically used in previous cycles.
Thank you.
That's what we would deliver in mid-October.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Leader Benninghoff, anything more?
No, I just want to commend you as well as I think the all the more reason why we're doing these hearings now, even though we're waiting on that data. I think we can get the ball rolling, let the public know what's going on, and I think procedurally that's smart. We'll be prepared when the data gets here. So thank you both for your testimony.
And let me say, consistent with the testimony that you have heard, if you take the constitutional time periods and lay them out from October 15th, you do take the process well into the new year and beyond some of the existing deadlines for the primary elections. I think it's commendable that the Legislative Data Processing Center, working with the Penn State Data Center, already has compressed the time for their work almost in half. And I can say, I think, on behalf of the Commission, that we all are committed to completing our work as expeditiously as possible, but consistent with the importance of the undertaking and the need to ensure that there is opportunity for public participation in the process. And so there are time periods where it's not just our work, but it is our work enriched by the contributions that we receive from the public that require an adequate amount of time. So I would thank you, Ms. Schultz, at a distance, and thank you, Mr. McClintock, who I see regularly, and again, join with the other commissioners in applauding your determined efforts. The key clash, if I can call it that, is the intersection or lack of intersection between the reapportionment process and the deadlines for the primary elections. We all, as commissioners, had received in the last 2 weeks a letter from the acting Secretary of the Commonwealth advising us of the deadlines that would begin emerging early in the calendar year. And so we invited representatives of the Department of State to come and testify more publicly about that. There were some calendar conflicts at play, and so if you saw the agenda that we posted yesterday, we had an all-star roster of people who might be joining us today. As things have unfolded, Jessica Mathis, the director of the Bureau of Elections and Notaries in the Department of State, is here to testify, and she is joined by some of her colleagues. Ms. Mathis, would you care to come forward? Let me also say, as she is taking our seat, that the letter that we received from the acting Secretary of the Commonwealth also will be entered into the record of this hearing. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chair Nordenberg, Honorable Senator and Representative, thank you for inviting the Department of State to participate in this hearing today. We're grateful for the opportunity to contribute our knowledge and experience in election administration and discuss the impact legislative reapportionment will have on election preparations for the 2022 primary election for both the counties and the Department of State. My name is Jessica Mathis. I am the Director of the Bureau of Election Services and Notaries. As the Director of the Bureau, I supervise the Commonwealth's Election Services and Voter Registration Divisions. The Bureau is responsible for planning, developing, and coordinating the statewide implementation of the Election Code, voter registration process, and the Notary's public law. I've been the Director since 2019. Prior to that, I was the Chief of the Division of Elections from 2008 till 2019 in the Bureau of Commissions, Elections, and Legislation. And in 2007, when I started with the department, I was a legal assistant in the Campaign Finance Division in that bureau. So So today I'm here on behalf of the Department of State to share insight and concerns regarding the redistricting process timeline and to highlight the administrative responsibilities of the department in the Pennsylvania's 67 counties. Our counties do incredible work to facilitate safe and secure elections across the Commonwealth, and there is so much work that gets done behind the scenes well ahead of Election Day. There are several key statutory election deadlines that are reliant upon the redistricting plan being deemed final and approved well before the May 2022 primary election. First, candidates may begin to circulate and file nomination petitions as early as February 15th, 2022, but may file petitions no later than March 8th, 2022. To circulate nomination petitions, candidates and voters must know the district boundary lines for legislative districts. This is essential since candidates running for legislative office may only solicit signatures on nomination petitions from registered voters within their legislative district. As you or anyone who has run for public office would tell you, it takes a lot of time to knock on doors, speak with potential voters, and obtain the needed number of signatures to file nomination petitions. Additionally, once the legislative reapportionment plan is final, meaning all appeals to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court have been decided, or the 30-day appeal period has lapsed with no appeals, the county boards of elections must quickly assign voters to their correct legislative districts in the statewide Uniform Registry of Electors, what we call SURE, to facilitate the signature gathering process. These SURE tasks are time-intensive and require the highest degree of accuracy. Historically, county boards of elections have needed at least 3 weeks before the start of nomination petition filing to complete these tasks in the SURE system and to distribute nomination forms to prospective candidates and their volunteers. On top of any SURE system updates, the department will also need to notify all candidates running for office and all for the county offices. From there, the counties need to process absentee and mail-in ballot applications, finalize ballots, and then mail those ballots. Assigning voters to the correct legislative district in the SURE system is also necessary to ensure voters receive the correct absentee or mail-in ballots. Counties must begin to send absentee ballots 50 days before the primary election to military and overseas voters in remote locations. Counties also send absentee ballots 45 days before the primary election to all other military and overseas voters. These early absentee voters need to know the candidates for each legislative office on the ballot. For these reasons, it would be ideal for the department to receive an approved final legislative reapportionment plan that has the force of law no later than January 24th, 2022. This time frame would help the counties reduce errors, allow for timely notice to candidates, and permit the proper implementation of the new legislative districts by the 2022 primary election. We have a responsibility to publish both the preliminary and the new plan in newspapers across the Commonwealth as well. And it is absolutely our intention to comply and quickly publish the maps and verbal descriptions designated by the final plan as soon as they are made available. We use your data to educate the voters and candidates alike and make sure that everyone is well informed. Any delays in the redistricting process could result in less time to inform the public to these changes. Despite any federal delays in transmitting the data, it's my understanding, as was just mentioned, that the Census Bureau will provide a legacy format summary redistricting data file to all states by mid to late August 2021. Although the raw data may be less user-friendly, the department would urge the LRC to consider employing resources with the skills and capacity to tabulate this raw data ahead of the September 30th release of the tabulated data. Perhaps the addition of even just a few extra weeks would help the LRC achieve the greatest success in an already condensed legislative reapportionment process. If an appeal to the final plan is filed with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, as many have previously, we are hopeful that any appeal will receive an expedited review and adjudication by the court. Sufficient time must be afforded to the court to hear any appeals and ultimately determine whether the final plan shall have the force of law, so it can be used for the 2022 general primary. To that end, we'd ask the LRC to effectively shorten any time periods within its control. We know there is a significant amount of work to be done and that transparency and public participation must be factored into the legislative reapportionment process. We can assure you our staff stands ready and willing to assist the LRC in any way possible. The department will be prepared to quickly process the information from the preliminary and final reapportionment plans for publication in newspapers throughout the Commonwealth and educate the candidates and voters via its website. Please know that we are ready to implement whatever maps are created when they are approved and final. We appreciate your receptiveness to the critical timelines that we in the counties work with to implement secure, accessible elections in Pennsylvania. And thank you for your time and leadership in this crucial process to ensure fair and equal representation in the Pennsylvania General Assembly for all citizens of the Commonwealth. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to share our insight today.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe I should reverse order and turn to my left this time and ask Senator Costa first if he has questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I recognize the time constraints you referenced, but I think as the chairman has mentioned and my colleagues have referenced, our highest priority is an open and transparent process and not to be reduced as much as we can by shortening timelines. We need to have public input in that regard. But one area I think, and I'm not certain, but I'll ask you whether we can do this or not, in shortening the period, what I think is 13 weeks from the February 15th deadline date to the, I guess, May 17th election day. Does it need to be 13 weeks? Is that a statutory change that could be made in lieu of moving the primary back, or on the other end, limiting openness and transparency?
So that is a statutory deadline, so any date that, that is moved in the election calendar, since they all, it's like a domino effect. So if you move one date, you're gonna have to move all the dates, and you are correct. It's 13, petition filing starts 13 weeks before the primary.
But you indicated you could use maybe 3 weeks possibly or so. If we had to find 3 weeks, do you think it'd be appropriate to reduce the 13-week lead time from the date you start circulating petitions to election day, reducing it statutorily to 10 in lieu of moving the election date itself?
For the General Assembly to move the
Yes,
statutory
certainly,
deadline?
yeah, the General Assembly. If that, what would your thoughts be on something along those lines?
Well, certainly we're going to work with all of you to the best of our ability. We would ask that the final plan, be in the force and effect in law no later than January 24th. So we would have those 3 weeks for the counties to prepare the shore system so that we could start petition filing based on the calendar now.
As you indicated, some of that is out of our control through the process, whether the length of time it
Correct.
takes,
Yes.
and appeals and the like. But the important thing is, I think you recognize that we have an opportunity. I think if we have to, there's places we can go to shorten the time frame without impacting on the nature of our process, which I think is important.
We would
Thank you.
certainly work with the LLC to get everything done as quickly and timely as we can.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Leader Benninghoff.
Thank you. I just want to also appreciate your past and present work. I actually had a question. I'm curious of how technology advancement since the last 10 years that this was done has helped to better expedite getting information out. You had mentioned, and not everyone realizes, that you had to post these in newspapers. Are you allowed, and if so, does it help expedite that by putting this stuff online? As you know, we're trying to be very transparent, putting information up in a pretty short time period. I would think that with today's technological advances, some of this should be exponentially able to be done better than it was 10 years ago and more quickly.
Certainly receiving shape files and information like that helps. We do post information on our website. We actually, years ago, had a link to the Legislative Reapportionment Commission's website on our website, but we do have a statutory requirement, and I will double check on that, to post them in the newspapers. Yes.
And that's probably an archaic practice, but a time prior to the internet. But that doesn't necessarily prohibit us from also making them accessible to the public electronically in a quicker manner.
Yes, and they will be. We would post them on our website, and, you know, I know that the commission posts them on their website as well.
Good.
So, yes.
I just think it gives us an opportunity, as Senator Costa said, if we need to adapt and trim a little here and trim a little there, we can probably do that and still get information to the public as exponentially as possible. I appreciate your candor on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And probably the general message that is emerging is that all of us are going to have to think about what we can do to trim and expedite the work that is required if we're going to try to move forward in a way that creates the right kind of mesh between the reapportionment work and the primary elections. And so we'll look to you to keep thinking about the places in which you can do that, and we will pledge that we're going to look for ways in which we can do that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Over the course of the next several weeks, we hope to be able to hear more directly from citizens themselves regarding their views on redistricting criteria and objectives. We will do that both through an enhanced website and through our own hearings. I also should say that there are processes moving forward on parallel tracks that will generate information that ought to be usable by all. Certainly, I have benefited by viewing some of the proceedings in the Senate State Government Committee. I saw that the House Republicans yesterday announced an ambitious plan. There also, though, is existing information that we should take full advantage of. Most notably, perhaps, the Pennsylvania Redistricting Reform Commission, which was appointed by the governor and on which I believe Senator Costa served, conducted 12 hearings in different parts of the state. It also collected online comments and conducted an online survey before completing and releasing its August 2019 report. David Thornburg, who is CEO of the Committee of 70, a nonpartisan good governance group headquartered in Philadelphia that has been in existence for more than a century, served as chair of that commission. He is here today remotely connecting with us to offer testimony about the commission's findings, as well as perspectives gained through his service as managing director of Draw the Lines PA, an initiative that has engaged 7,200 citizen mappers who have completed and submitted 1,500 final maps. A good bit of the commission's work had to do with whether the three of us should be sitting here today or whether we should have been replaced by some other form of tribunal. That question has been answered for this cycle. And so Mr. Thornburg today is going to focus on the information that they gathered regarding criteria and objectives for redistricting. Mr. Thornburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Leader Benninghoff and Leader Costa and Leader Clinton. And I just wanted to say I applaud your commitment to transparency and to public engagement. And Leader Benninghoff, I also want to commend you and your House Republican colleagues for your statement yesterday. That's a sound step forward towards showing people in Pennsylvania that we can approach this process with transparency, which ultimately can do nothing other than to encourage their trust. If I can master the technology, I'd like to share my screen so I can mount a. Oh no, that's not it. Oh, here we go. I've got a PowerPoint presentation that I would like to share with you. Everybody see that okay? Take that as an affirmative. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you and hope to add to some of the insights that you have and that I know you know intuitively in your conversations around the Commonwealth about what citizens want to see expressed in the maps, in this case, the legislative maps that you'll be working on. And I just pause to note that I know we've been talking about data and process for the last 45 minutes or so, but we've come to appreciate, as I'm sure you do, that ultimately legislative maps and congressional maps are often expressions of values and priorities. And when those values and priorities are in sync with those of our citizens, I think that again renews their faith and trust in the process and in the conversation between you as their representatives and they as those who are represented. So no further ado, as Chairman Nordenberg said, I wanted to share with you both some lessons from the work of the Redistricting Reform Commission and also our experience at Draw the Lines. Chair, I think covered some of this ground. I was remembering about 2 years ago right now, Senator Costa, we were hammering out the final details of our report, which benefited from a great deal of public input, not only the public meetings, but also an extensive public survey that I'll talk about in a minute. The commission addressed both the congressional and legislative processes, recognizing that citizens really don't distinguish between the two when it comes to expressing their values and priorities and the process that they'd like to see. In this venue, I'm going to concentrate on just one piece of the findings of the commission, which is what we came to think of as the what and the how. The what being the criteria that are used to draw the maps, and what we gleaned from the public input is, not surprisingly, that they should be clear, concise, and accountable. The how refers to the process by which the maps are drawn or vetted or approved. And in this case, there was a strong sentiment that process again be straightforward and transparent, and use the technology that we have to increase opportunities for engagement. And finally, there was a clear statement that when maps are vetted or presented, either preliminary or final, they should be accompanied by a story. Maps tell stories. Each twist and turn means something, and to the maximum extent possible, citizens suggested that they needed to know what that story was. Let me share with you the results of the public survey. It was a phone survey designed and conducted by Dr. Leanne Banaszak, who was chair of the political science department at Penn State and a commission member. I should note she did this on her own dime. We were squeezing every nickel in the commission's work. And she sampled a random sample of voters that were reached by phone. And then because they were not well represented in the original survey, she went back and added additional samples of Republican voters, Black voters, and Latinx voters. The chart on the left or the right summarizes the overall findings when people were asked to put in rank order the values or goals or priorities that they thought should be embodied in the maps. Most important, equal population, contiguity, meaning things are next to each other, compactness, minimizing splits, and so on and so forth. Noting that at the bottom was protecting incumbents and also giving advantage to one party or another. There were differences when Dr. Banaszak went to oversample Black and Latinx voters. They bumped up minority representation to third in their statement of goals. And when Republicans were asked that oversample of Republicans, they bumped up incumbent protection to third. So by and large, I think it's fair to say that there was a decent amount of agreement around these rankings, but with the exceptions that I mentioned. Also talked about the public meetings that we held across the Commonwealth that were attended by 600 citizens. We did those, as Senator Costa remembers, in what I'll call a moderated discussion format, which I thought worked quite well. It was not speak your piece in 2 minutes and sit down, but rather a more informal and I think fluid and insightful conversation with people as citizens and neighbors and voters and leaders in their community. A couple additional insights that came out that I think worthy of note, that more than one, several people along the way suggested that while it's not embedded in the constitutional language, that they would like to see maps that didn't split school districts, which are hugely important, as you all know, to people in their communities. And also a fair amount of testimony on the concept of communities of interest. And while I understand and recognize that's a challenging concept to wrestle to the ground, that there was a great deal of conversation around that topic in our meetings around the Commonwealth. So now let me switch to the lessons that we have gained from our experience in the Draw the Lines Pennsylvania project, which is abbreviated DTL. DTL is a statewide nonpartisan exercise in citizen engagement around redistricting. We say with only slightly tongue-in-cheek that it is the largest citizen engagement around redistricting in the history of the nation. And we're very proud of the fact that we've been able, with support, I should say, from Pennsylvania foundations and philanthropies, to engage as many people around this important process. We have a statewide steering committee that's now chaired by former Governor Schweiker and Dr. Brown, who is the director of the Center for Women in Politics at Chatham University in Pittsburgh. The essence of Draw the Lines was that we sponsored, starting in 2018, twice yearly map drawing competitions around congressional and legislative districts. So in other words, we put software and data in the hands of anyone who wanted the opportunity, but concentrated particularly among young people, given that in many cases, the districts that you'll be drawing are those in which they will inherit, and which many of them will be casting a vote for the first time. We had about 12,000 people participate in this process, ranging from attending forums and briefings and seminars to, we had 7,200 who actually took up the challenge of drawing maps, and they completed 1,500 of them. Most of them were congressional maps. I'm sure you can appreciate it's easier to do 17 or 18 than it is 203 or 50, but about 10% of them were the legislative maps. For these purposes, though, I think, as I'll be showing you in the next few minutes, it's useful to, again, recognize that the patterns or the values or the priorities that come out in either map drawing process are pretty consistent, and that citizens don't distinguish between the two when it comes to that kind of work. So just a little more about the mappers. They came from 40 counties. Those 40 counties represented about 90% of Pennsylvania's population. They represented 150 schools and colleges. And at age 13 to 70, as I said, with a good distribution among those who were in high school and college. Let me just emphasize the second bullet point, because there's been some confusion in other airings of the work of Draw the Lines. The participants drew their own maps using their own values and priorities. The cards that are on the right there represent an exercise that we had all mappers go through before they picked up the mouse or the digital pen to draw maps. point being that you can't draw a map unless you have some understanding of the values, priorities, or goals that you'd like to bring to those maps. So they were not supplied with those values or priorities, they were their own. When it came time to judging those maps, and the maps were judged by about 60 community leaders from around the Commonwealth, the judges were simply looking at how well the maps achieved the individual mappers' goals. And we also asked them to accompany their map with a statement, so we had a clear sense of what those goals were. This is the reality on which the whole experiment, if you will, Draw the Lines was launched, which is that for the first time ever in the history of this country, powerful mapping tools are widely available and free. Pictured here is, I suspect some of the GIS specialists in the room are familiar with this. This is something called Dave's redistricting. And by the way, there is no relation. Dave is a former Microsoft software engineer who took this on as a passion project. This is available online to anyone. It has come leaps and bounds in the last 5 years, and it covers every state in the union, even city council districts, and gives mappers, citizen mappers, the tools to draw their own maps and then learn from those maps. And as I'll show in a minute, to see how those maps score around critical metrics. So this is just an astounding leap forward in the tools available to citizens in participating in this important process. This is one of the great things about the tools is that once you draw a map, you can then turn the analytics to work to tell you how you did around a certain set of common metrics. And these are the ones that are used in Dave's redistricting. Some of them are easy to count. Jurisdictional splits simply means how many times you split a political subdivision. Population deviance, the difference between the largest and smallest district. Some of them are a little more sophisticated. Compactness uses a statistical measure that notes, compared to a perfect circle, how compact that district is, which is a reflection of how easy it is for citizens and voters in that district to access their representative. So I wanted to say a quick note. As I said, most of these maps were congressional maps, but we had about 60 legislative maps that were completed. And one observation is that when we looked at the scores or the metrics from those maps, they are more compact, more competitive, and more proportional than the 2012 LRC maps, and that the population deviations and numbers of majority-minority districts are equal to the 2012 LRC maps. So that gives us some confidence, even based on 60 maps, that citizens, given the tools and the data, can do a good job on behalf of their Commonwealth. This is a chart that extends that comparison a little bit, that also looks at the congressional districts and the state house districts that were mapped by our citizen mappers. And here I would just say, in terms of interpreting the scores, the 27%, looking at the top row, the 27% or the 50 or the average of competitive districts is a standard measured against the ideal of 100. So in other words, in a perfect world, given an infinite number of randomly generated maps, you would have 100% compactness. But in this case, the reality of the maps that were produced might achieve a score of 27%. So you could say 20% of a perfect ideal. But again, what's significant is that the maps generated by our mappers, as I said earlier, hold up very well around these critical scores, do as well of as, if not better than, the maps that were approved either in 2012 by the LRC or 2018, in this case by the Supreme Court. this is just a further illustration of that, and maybe a graphic representation. These are tools that are drawn from Dave's redistricting. So once you draw a map, it will generate this, what we call a spider web graph, that gives you a visual representation of how well your map did against the ideal, and then you can compare it to other maps. So all for the purposes of today, just know that a bigger score is better, and that, as I said earlier, 100 is the theoretical upper limit of perfection in any one of these scores. On the left is the 2018 congressional map drawn by the experts retained by the court. And on the right is you could call it a composite map, or an average map that is gleaned from the 1,500 maps submitted by our citizen mappers. And at a glance, I think you can see again that our citizen map, the wisdom of crowds, if you will, does as well as, if not better than, the map that was generated by, let's acknowledge, an out-of-state expert. So this again attests to the power of the software and the willingness of citizens to get involved in this critical process. Just conclude with some general takeaways, and then I'd be happy to entertain questions. I've said a couple times, it is astounding how fast the mapping technology has improved, and it is accessible and free to average citizens, and is already being used and will be used this time around to draw and score maps. Second point is that for your purposes, since you work with the constitutional requirements coming from the 1968 amendments, that the citizen priorities in terms of what they would like to see coming from the maps are consistent with those constitutional requirements: population, contiguity, the minimizing splits except where absolutely necessary. And then the third point, again, just to summarize, is that our experience with Draw the Lines, that it demonstrates that given the opportunity, citizens can draw maps that are comparable to, if not better than, those drawn in the past. So I would suggest for your purposes, this both raises the bar for your expectations of citizen engagement in this process, and I'll acknowledge presents you with a challenge, because there are thousands of people around the Commonwealth who are versed in this project, in this process, and will be looking for ways to participate to inform your decisions. With that, I'll stop sharing, and I would be happy to entertain any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thornburg. Leader Benninghoff, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, and thank you again, Mr. Thornburg, for your testimony. I appreciate you taking note that the citizens' desired outcomes are very similar to what our Constitution kind of requires now, so it's good to have that commonality. One thing I noted in your presentation, and maybe it's just an oversight or I didn't hear it properly, in your oral presentation, you talked about trying to be cautious not to be splitting counties, but I didn't hear anything as far as other smaller subdivisions, municipalities, boroughs, cities, and those other things that we have to consider under our mapping process, which obviously makes it a little more difficult when you're trying to get to a certain number of equality of not splitting these smaller subdivisions.
Yeah, again, I was reflecting the experience of the choices that citizens were making in drawing their own maps. So I'm not bringing my own prejudices or goals or interests to this question. I would say that when we first started doing this project, we were using a different software, which didn't allow us to calculate the number of splits at the municipal level, boroughs and townships and cities. The later versions we did. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between the two, but it does allow, again, the software that's available now does allow you to score the maps based on how many splits it creates across the Commonwealth.
Thank you for that clarification. I think it's important because those are things that we will have to be considering and have in the past. Thanks again for your work.
Leader Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few again, say thank you for your leadership and your chairmanship of the committee and the task force we put together, and the citizen involvement. And I think you talked about the fluid nature of our conversations and the like. I think were very helpful. Quick question, in terms of the technology that you referenced as advanced over the short number of years. Seems to me that right now, school district boundaries are significant, and certainly communities of interest and the like. How are those type of things measured? Are they able to be measured in these new technologies at all? I imagine you can do an overlay with respect to school districts to ensure that we're not splitting up many school districts. But things like communities of interest, how do we define, how do we make sure that we take that into consideration?
Right. I'll take the easy question first, and I think you already answered your own question. It's relatively straightforward to count the number of school districts that would be split by a map. Because communities of interest exists in the eye of the beholder, in the eye of citizens and communities around the Commonwealth, it's really much more difficult to try to describe or to measure in mapping software. You may recall some of the conversations we had 2 years ago. The conclusion I came to is that that you use the citizen engagement process to reveal what those communities are. It's sort of like you draw a map, you present it to citizens, and then you invite their comment to say something as seemingly simple and straightforward, but controversial in a Pennsylvania community. If you happen to put two competing high school football teams together in the same district, you might be causing yourself some problems, let's just say. You won't know that unless people tell you that based on a map that you've submitted. So that's just a somewhat maybe trivial but real example of the kind of input that you gain that could help you, again, sort of fine tune the contours of a map that you had shared with citizens.
That's the intersection of the technology and the human input, basically, through this process.
Absolutely, yep.
Thank you again very much.
Thank you.
To go back to community of interest just for a minute, because Senator Costa raised it, you said the testimony on community of interest was divided. What did you mean by that?
Well, in a couple ways. One is the topic came up repeatedly in conversation, but then we would ask the same question that Senator Costa asked, which is, can you help me understand what that means, how I would measure it, how I would, and then the answers got a little murkier. Other folks, though, would raise the topic and say, maybe give you more of the response that I just gave to Senator Costa, which is that would be, you would invite comments on communities of interest as a way of fine-tuning a map that had already been presented, just because recognizing that it's a squishy concept that does, as I said earlier, exist in the eye of the beholder. So there was statistical term, there was noise around that question of communities of interest.
Peter Benninghoff, more questions?
No, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Thornburg.
I have a couple more then. First, when you said that you invited the mappers to base their maps on their own values,
Yep.
And this is really an extension of Leader Benninghoff's question. Were they constrained by the criteria specifically listed in the Constitution, or could they value other things higher in their work?
Yeah. I won't flip back to it, but the cards that we used that I had on a slide included some of those that are in the Constitution and others. There is a card for communities of interest. There's literally a wild card I remember we had one mapper who was very interested in preserving watersheds. And so she drew a map that respected the watersheds of Pennsylvania. So there were sort of a set menu that they could order from, but then they could go off menu because, again, we weren't trying to influence the criteria that they use. We just wanted them to think hard about how to do this and then judge them accordingly.
There are those who believe, I think, that there is a best way to draw a map, that you start with a particular one of the requirements in the Constitution, and you work out from there. But I gather that's not your philosophy at Draw the Lines or your experience either.
Well, again, I'll reflect back. I won't pull it up, but the spider graph chart of the preferences and values that our mappers brought to it, a word I would use to describe that chart is it looks pretty balanced. There's no outlier that jumps out. So, and that's, again, based on 1,500 individual Pennsylvanians who took up this challenge. So that gives me some confidence that this is, I hope, not a controversial statement, that people want balance. They want balance in their maps.
Any other questions from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, your second question really kind of hit the nail on the head, and people don't necessarily always remember this, and I think it's important to note, but Pennsylvania has 2,600 municipalities, and neighboring municipalities can be very different, and they can be smaller or larger, but the interest in different municipalities is very different. In some of my own areas, my own little town, the borough actually sits in the middle of a township that's surrounded. So if you go 2 blocks beyond my house, you've entered into another township. You can go 6 blocks the other direction, and you're back in that township again. So I think it's important to note that while we try to follow all these criteria, it is not an exact science, and we try to do it to the best of our abilities, be compact, conscientious to those criteria set before us in the Constitution. So appreciate your candor and bringing that question up.
And I know we do hope that when our website is up and functioning, it will be one way for people in particular parts of the state to point out issues that they think exist with the current maps and how they could be improved, because a lot of this is local.
Mr. Chair, if I could just offer a comment on that thought. Again, having gone through the experience with our advisory commission, when we were talking with people about concepts rather than actual maps, I think you will get much more useful feedback when you ask people to take a look at a map and tell you what's either right or wrong. We all know all the turns and twists of the last 4 or 5 years in seeking to improve this process. Many of those have fallen short. Now this is about maps, and I again commend your good work and hope you will continue to invite citizens to comment on their maps.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Mr. Thornburg. I do thank Leader Benninghoff and Leader Costa for being here, and I thank all of you for your interest as well. We look forward to traveling down this road in your company. Thanks again. This meeting is adjourned.